My goodness, we're trying to wiggle. We're trying to wiggle our butt. Are you happy, girl? Look at your boxy rags. Oh goodness. Oh my goodness. She wants to meet the rest of the dogs so badly. Okay, soon. Come here. What are you doing? What are you doing? Charlie. Excuse me, ma'am. What are you doing? You're supposed to be in the back seat. What do you think you're doing? I just love how much she rolls around. She has gained weight. Yes, so slowly but surely, guys. What are you doing, Tootie? She's just so happy. Yeah. Excuse me. This is what she does when she wants to play. Go get a toy. You want to play? Get it. Get it. Get it. Ready? Get it. Yeah.
I've been getting a lot of questions about Pretty Lady's weight gain. The first couple weeks when a dog is this emaciated is pretty stagnant, meaning that initially it takes a while for them to start gaining. We can actually even see them lose a pound or two at first, but she is on the right track and doing very well. I really start to see more of that weight gain happen after the initial month, so we'll be tracking it and hopefully start to see that more and more.
Excuse me? Did you miss me? Hi, cuties. Did you miss me? What? What is this cute face?
This wiggle butt is officially up 6 pounds since we rescued her. Oh, she's distracted by Sal. Excuse me. So we're slowly seeing that weight gain. It's always hard to see at the beginning because I'm like, gosh, you're still just so skinny. But we are up 6 pounds. Oh, look at those eyes. All right, Pretty Lady. Sal, look. I have 2 toys. No, you crazy. Go get it. Pretty Lady. Yeah! Yay! We both got one. Are you so proud? Are you so proud? They both just don't care. They both just dropped one. What are y'all doing? Is that so? Hey. I know. No, he doesn't want to play. Leave him alone. You're such a boxer. You're a very patient boy. Okay, good boy. Couple goobers. Cutie girl. No, no. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah? Wow. What are you doing? He's crazy. Go get him. Go get him. Go get him. Look, he's trying to play with you too. Oh, I know, I love you. Look, go get him.
Bye.